Ready? Test 1, 2. Hey everybody. I don't have a microphone tonight, so I'm just gonna have to shout, or you'll just have to be quieter. Dan Dreger, calling you out. It is my pleasure this morning, or this afternoon, to introduce Dave Klassen and his wife Mary Lou. Dave and Mary Lou are veteran MCCers. They've worked internationally with MCC for over 25 years. Dave, you have a degree in international development, and I feel like you're one of the kind of elite few with an international development degree that actually worked in development internationally. So stints across Africa, multiple terms in Nigeria. Your daughters were born in Kenya, couple Congo, 2 of them in Congo. Anyway, a great wealth of knowledge and experience. And also, if you happen to have looked at the 2019 MCC calendar, Dave's photo right at the front there, beautiful shot that he took in Bangladesh. And Dave's going to speak about his time in Bangladesh. And Dave, looking forward to, and oh, by the way, I met Dave first in Uganda. I was a salter there, and that's how I met Dave and Mary Lou. And yeah, it was a great connection. We're both from this area, and so, yeah, Mary, you were waiting for me to like tell that story of how he traumatized me in the first meeting? Yeah. Dave is a very, like, he can play a hard-nosed interrogator, so this like naive little 19-year-old that goes to Uganda, Dave sits me down, he's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, I don't know. Tell me. Anyway, so we've developed a great friendship, and Dave, appreciate your words always, and come on up, and looking forward to your time. Also, one quick thing. Dave asked for more than 30 minutes, and being that he has spent most of his career working in various parts of Africa, I feel like it's just sort of a cultural thing. So, to accommodate that cultural difference, Dave, your 30 minutes starts now, after my introduction. But if any of you need to leave and do your work, that's great. You guys can head out when you need to, but Dave will go and obviously have time for Q&A afterwards, and I think we will definitely have some Q&A, because he's got some good stuff coming up. So,
okay.
Dave.
Thank you, Ken. So yeah, Ken came to Uganda as a salter, and we actually had set him up with a partner that just before he came, the relationship with the partner sort of really went sour, and it was actually quite a dangerous, volatile situation. And Ken was great. I mean, he was far away from us, like about 6-8 hours drive to get to where Ken was. And this is at the beginning of cell phone technology, and so for Ken to be able to speak, for me to be able to speak to him, Ken had to climb a hill, stand by a particular tree, and then I would call him or he would call me. And so we would do this once a week, and Ken is just laid back, just doing his thing, teaching the kids, and had a really good time. It all worked out really, really well. So thank you for inviting Mary and I here today for a brief report on some of our experiences in Bangladesh. It was actually a fantastic experience. When MCC asked me to go to Bangladesh as interim rep, I says, what do I know about Asia? I know nothing. I'm an Africa boy. I've spent all my life in Africa. what do I know about Asia? And they said, no. You know MCC, being the rep and all that kind of stuff, so you'll just, fit right in. And so I did. I arrived there, and it is, I believe it is the largest MCC program that MCC has. At its peak in the 70s and 80s, there were 200 national staff and over 50 MCC volunteers from North America. So it was a big program. And so 3 country offices, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay. I got 2 buttons to press here now. Oops. Okay. Yeah, I think this is the one we're on. Okay, so Bangladesh has a population of 163 million people. So it's a small land area, just right over here, very small land area. So they actually call it an urban country because of the population density. Dhaka city, where we lived, has a population of about 20 million people and a population density of 45,000 people per square kilometer, which is 10 times that of Toronto. So it was very intense. It was very hot, very humid. We don't understand heat and humidity here in Ontario compared to Dhaka city. MCC came into the country in 1971 during a cyclone that they were having there, and so they came with relief and helped a lot of people. But then immediately following the cyclone in 1972, MCC decided this is a place we need to be, and so worked in the country. And these darker areas are the areas of poverty. MCC worked predominantly in the southern area at that time. They were working at desalination because there was a lot of saltwater issues down here. Brought in many agriculturalists, engineers, brought in seeds from around the world because Bangladesh was quite backwards in terms of agriculture. So today, Bangladeshi, 163 million people are eating carrots and cabbages and other vegetables because of MCC. So there's a significant sort of measurable impact. When you talk about measurable impact, I think Bangladesh is a real good case in point of what happened there. So the areas of focus now of MCC, back a number of years ago, they decided to refocus and reduce down. So we have a staff there of about 70 people, very few internationals, but mostly from Bangladesh. And 3 country offices. Here's Dhaka, here's Mymensingh, and Bogra. And the areas of work is sort of this area, the more poverty sort of stricken areas. And the areas of focus are what MCC does: health, agriculture, peace building, economic development, education, and social development. I'm going to show you a very brief little video here now. Which sort of talks about the summary of my experience in Bangladesh. I really enjoyed, Mary was with me for 4 months. I was there for about 8 months. And I really enjoyed the people. I love the people. They were bright, colorful, and I considered them a gentle people. Having worked in Nigeria where there's a lot of life, a lot of energy, the contrast was quite interesting. And I love them all. Nigerians and Bangladeshis, I love them all. But I consider the Bangladeshi people to be a gentle people. Very welcoming, very hospitable, and enthusiastic, but not quite the same energy levels as we had in Nigeria. So I would go out on weekends, many, many weekends, that I would just photograph with one of my colleagues. And people love being photographed in Bangladesh. We would be out on the railway tracks, photographing people, and they would say, come over here, photograph me. And I'm coming there. I'm quite obviously a photographer. I've got big equipment and stuff, and they would want to be photographed. So it was a real privilege and a lot of fun to do that. So this is a sort of a summary. So I'm going to just switch gears a little bit. That was a brief summary of MCC in Bangladesh, and I could talk a lot about that. You guys need to switch. I need to switch. So one of the things that happens in Bangladesh is they produce clothing. In fact, they're the second largest producer of clothing in the world after China. And I mean, one of our photography trips with Niazil, we're on a bus and we get off the bus and I go home and I forgot my hat on the bus. And I told Niazil, I forgot my hat. And he goes, it was a Tilly's hat, no less. And Niazil goes, Dave, we clothe the world. Certainly we can find you a hat in Bangladesh. Unfortunately, we couldn't because my head is too big and they have small heads, so we couldn't find it. But I was blown away by the garment industry. This photograph was taken 15 minutes before we arrived at this location. This street was completely empty. There was no people. 15 minutes later, it was empty. So this is an area where there's a lot of garment factories around. I was unable to get into the factories, so any photographs you see that were inside the factories, I was unable to get in. I did not take those. But the people that are employed, and you could see it as you move around the city, you would see groups mainly of women, colorfully dressed, moving with a purpose, and you knew that there was a shift change. Something was going on. They were changing shifts. So I was going to show you a brief video, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip that. But it sort of illustrates some of the history of Bangladesh way back. Back in Bengal days, before independence and the departure from India, before even colonial days, Bengal was called the paradise on earth. It was renowned for its textile industry, and its fabrics enjoyed the prestige of popularity around the world for hundreds of years. The production process of Dhaka muslin was spectacularly demanding from beginning to end. The cotton plant itself only grew on a tract of land very close to Dhaka city. And they tried actually to grow it in other locations, but it was impossible to grow it. Its fibers were very fine and very resilient. In fact, they could weave them together, and they say, the story is, that they could do 1,000 threads per inch. And because it was so fine, you could actually fold up this cloth and put it into a matchbox. That's how fine it was. So it was pretty amazing, and people really appreciated it all around the world. The thread was spun in very humid conditions, usually in the morning or the evening, and then only by young women whose supple fingers worked with the water bowls around them to moisten the air. This is a picture or a drawing from those days, and interestingly, it's a man that's doing it, yet they say that it was mainly women, that actually wove the thread. Oops. Okay. So Bengal was conquered by the British East India Company after the Battle of Plassey in 1757. The timing of colonization of Bengal coincided with the Industrial Revolution. So now Britain was manufacturing its own textiles with its machines. Raw cotton was also imported back into Britain without taxes or tariffs to feed British factories. The cotton was used to manufacture textiles, many of which were then exported back to Bangladesh or to Bengal. British economic policies led to the deindustrialization of Bengal. British colonization forced open the Bengali market to British goods, while at the same time Britain implemented protectionist policies such as bans and high tariffs that restricted Bengali imports to Britain. Interestingly, this coincided with the Great Bengal Famine of 1770, which killed about 10 million people in Bangladesh. And there were a whole variety of reasons for that, some of which are attributed to the British colonial history, where heavy taxes were introduced on the people, some as high as 50% for agricultural products. It forced people to cultivate opium poppy instead of food crops, and they didn't allow people to hoard rice, what they considered hoarding. So there was no reserve when the rains, the monsoons failed. So this is another drawing of sort of that famine that took place at that time. So the spinners and weavers that were weaving this very, very fine cotton, they changed occupations. In fact, the British East Indian Company could not compete with local muslin with their own export of cloths to India. So muslin production in Bengal represented the knowledge of this fine cotton was eradicated. There's a story that weavers were systematically rounded up and their hands mutilated so they could no longer do this fine work. Along the riverbanks, then the putu kapi, the cotton that was used, this very fine muslin, became extinct and is no longer available. There is something called jamadani, known as figure muslin, due to the flower and abstract motifs woven around it that survived to present times. Mary, do you want to talk a little bit about women and their...
We're worked on this together, but it's mostly him. I've been doing other teaching, so I haven't had a lot of time. So the women's, so one of the things that I was most impressed by, I'm actually wearing some gifts from Bangladesh, but the crafts that women carry out, and we didn't bring any samples, but they do embroidery kind of as a tradition. And I was visiting a friend one day, and she just started picking up a piece of cloth and said, I want to show my daughters how to do this. I want to make a business out of this. And just started embroidering a flower design that just kind of freehand. And we have samples that we were given of this kind of freehand, like big blankets stitched with this kind of freehand embroidery. It's not stamped on images, it's just all freehand. And you saw that image of the women, they were doing work with pabitra. And that again is kind of a quilting. They take old saris and make layers of them and turn them into other products. And again, that quilting, it's not on a big frame, it's all by hand. So it seems like that tradition of textiles is a long-standing one in this country. And so it's interesting to see how it's changed, as Dave was talking about.
So enter the fast fashion industry and the fast fashion world of ready-made garments. As I said earlier, Bangladesh is the second largest producer of garments, and I was blown away by this fact and the impact that it has on the country. 80% of their foreign exchange comes from fashion. So, and there are 4 million people, of which 85% are women, young women, that are employed in this industry. So it's a really interesting and dynamic for Bangladesh to be a part of. So how many of you have ever heard of fast fashion? A few. Well, that's really, I mean, yeah, I mean, given the repurpose center, I'm sure you would have really looked into that quite extensively. Fast fashion. Moving right along here. Fast fashion clothing collections are based on the most recent fashion trends that are presented at Fashion Week in autumn and spring every year. Fast fashion was developed from a product-driven concept based on a manufacturing model first referred to as quick response, developed in the US in the 80s and moved to a market-based model of fast fashion in the late 90s and the early part of the 21st century. The global industry is valued at $2.4 trillion. In fact, not only does this industry literally touch everyone, but also it would be the world's seventh largest economy if ranked alongside individual countries' gross domestic products. While the total number of workers in this industry is not known, in 2014, the textile, clothing, and footwear sector worldwide was estimated to employ about 60 to 75 million people, 3/4 of whom are women, young women. Much of the tremendous growth of this sector and its role in economic powerhouse for the country of Bangladesh is attributed to the availability of cheap labor. Much of this cheap labor is supplied by countries like China, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, and others. Of the 4 million workers employed in the ready-made garment industry in Bangladesh, 85% are illiterate women from rural villages. So the fast fashion impact is quite dramatic. So you've got 40 million people working in the garment sector. In Bangladesh, 4 million people are involved. 5,000 factories in Bangladesh producing for Western brands, 85% women. and it's the lowest paid garment labor in the world, actually, garment industry. Bangladesh, the last raise that they got was in 2013, so they're making around $60, $70 a month to make our clothing. So the next time you go in and buy a piece of clothing at Sears is no longer there, but at the Bay or wherever you go to buy your clothing, think about this. This is a really interesting sort of illustration of the challenge or the discrepancy, the disparity. So the impact of fast fashion is that we purchase over 80 billion pieces of new clothing a year. And the rubbish that goes into the industry is huge. They say that the textile industry is the second largest polluter in the world after the petroleum industry. So what are the impacts of fast fashion? There's the introduction of GMO cotton, which uses pesticides, and it's quite dramatic how much pesticides is used in the growing of cotton. Labor is another massive deal. In Uzbekistan, over 1 million people are used in harvest season to pick cotton, and they are largely unpaid. Bangladesh produces 1% of the cotton that they use, so it's hardly anything. So they import their cotton from India, USA, Africa, and the Russian Commonwealth countries. And then, interestingly, the whole cotton industry uses a massive amount of water. So here's an illustration talking about jeans. They say that one pair of jeans from cotton to finished product is using over 7,000 liters of water. And this is fresh water. Another thing that I learned, and I did a pile of research to figure all this out, because it wasn't readily apparent in Bangladesh. You could see the labor and you knew the labor challenges there, but to actually understand some of the environmental impacts of the fashion industry was quite dramatic. Making a pair of jeans, especially jeans that are what they call stonewashed, they actually blast them with some kind of a product that goes into the air. The guys that are doing it are not protected properly, and their lifespan is like 3 years. And so when you wear stonewashed jeans and you go like, you understand that the impact of that is like quite startling. And then of course the impact on the labor. Often it's overcrowding, very long hours, forced overtime, few days off, minimal breaks, poor lighting, poor ventilation, noise and sound protection. And then of course, this is the event that put sort of the garment industry on the map, and that's the Rana garment industry factory that collapsed in 2013. Probably most of the world heard about that. Over 1,200 people were killed, many were injured, and the impact was quite dramatic. And then think about the environment. We went out on the rivers. You've seen a lot of pictures of boats already. We went out on the rivers quite a few times, and the rivers would stink because the chemicals, the dyes that go into making the beautiful colors that we wear, many of them are carcinogenic, and so they go into the water, and the water would be black, and then you've got the other kind of pollution that would be there as well. This is, I mean, you could see sort of the blackness of the water, and it would literally stink, you know, and it's not from sewage. This is from chemicals. The leather industry used to be really big in Dhaka city, and the chemicals that are part of the leather industry is massive as well, and so they would be poured into the rivers as well. So the garment industry is, on the impact on the lives of women is really quite dramatic. The industry is dominated, the labor part of it is dominated by women. The administrative part of it and the ownership part of it is dominated by men. But of course the majority is women, and so they have the lowest wages of anywhere. Women are traditionally subordinate, and factories reproduce that way of thinking in the form of systemic discrimination. Attempts to mobilize into unions and protest and advocate for themselves are very much squashed. In fact, as a leader of any kind of a union initiative, your life is very much in jeopardy. Of course, there is sexual abuse and other physical abuse in the workplace. The garment industry also has impact on the lives of women in terms of domestic abuse, lack of affordable housing, and then the whole cultural shift. And even interestingly, even with MCC, you know, all of our staff, they live in Dhaka City, and you saw some of those images in that slideshow. Dhaka City is a city on levels. You know, with a population density of 45,000 people per square kilometer, people are living in apartments. So we were living on the 8th floor of an apartment building. That's where the MCC reps were staying. And so you get to know your neighbors as much as you meet them in the hallways and stuff. But it's very, very different from living in a village where you're actually having your friends and your neighbor and your family around you. So we would have discussions about that, you know, and children, you know, because of the congestion in the streets, you don't even play in the streets. You don't play, you know, your life is in sort of danger anywhere you go. So you got children playing on the tops of roofs of these apartment buildings, you know, and the ball goes flying over the edge. What happens, you know, and so women, I would watch some of these women because we were sitting on the top of our roof watching other roofs, and you know, you would see that the mothers are really watching with hawk eyes when their children are trying to play there. So the impact of the garment industry, the sort of the overcrowding and so on is quite dramatic in Bangladesh. So how do we respond? So I heard a story of a young teacher, Julia Mooney in South Jersey, who recently committed to wearing the same dress for 100 days, 100 school days in a row. She's received already quite dramatic attention, and you could Google her and you could see what she's done. And put simply for her, it's about pointing out how much her students consume, often due to peer pressure to buy the latest fashions, and find ways to reduce their environmental impact. So who made the clothes? Since I've gone to Bangladesh, I'm quite aware of the clothes that I wear. In fact, I haven't bought anything for the last 2 years because I don't. I have a closet full of clothing, and I'm not interested in going and buy. But when I do go in to these stores that do sell clothing, I will stop at Joe Fresh and I go, oh, okay, it's made in Bangladesh. I know those people. You know, be aware of who made those clothes and what their lives are like. Slow fashion, the slow fashion movement is something that, you know, I presented this to a group of older people the other day, and they all understood this. You know, what do? We recycle, we fix, we repair, we patch, we do all kinds of sort of natural things, organic, recycle. There's many kind of things that we could do, but alongside this, there's always the question of what happens to those 4 million women in Bangladesh, mainly women, and they've got jobs that are dependent on this, right? So if we all stop buying clothing, you know, all of us, then we've got a big challenge. So there's really a big deal. And then we've got the Repurpose Center, which is an attempt at addressing this issue, right? Because even though we've got thrift shops where all our clothing goes, what is it, 20% that get sold there and 80% go elsewhere? So now the Repurpose comes in, Repurpose Center, and we shop, weigh, and pay, and which is a really cool thing. It's a really cool idea, but then it's still many of those garments that don't get sold, they go elsewhere, right?
We sell them to other places in Canada.
And hopefully they stay in Canada. But many of them don't. They will go to Kenya, and then there another 10 or 20% are sold, and the rest of them are going to go to the landfill. So that's why this is such an environmental sort of challenge. If you go into 10,000 villages today, you will see this symbol, Prakriti, which is a very interesting symbol because it represents quite a number, probably 15, 20 initiatives on the part of MCC in Bangladesh to create jobs. When MCC went in 1972, they had two objectives. One was to address agricultural issues, and the other was to do job creation. So they started all kinds of initiatives all over the country to create jobs for people. And so the products that they make were eventually all put under the umbrella of Prakriti, and it was kind of spun off MCC. This took many, many years. There's still a relationship with Prakriti, but they are more or less on their own, doing their own thing. And so it is actually, again, another sort of measurable impact of MCC's involvement. We're not clicking here. So here's an interesting initiative that I met when I arrived in Bangladesh. I had just heard about this, what they call Fiber Research Center, and that there were issues with it. And so I tried to ignore it as best I could. But then the area director said, Dave, have you heard of this Fiber Research Center? And I said, yeah, I did. I was hoping that I wouldn't have to think about it. Well, it's an initiative that actually they say that MCC poured in several hundreds of thousands of dollars into this thing. So they had researchers there, engineers, trying to develop fiber from pineapples into something that could be made into thread and then made into clothing. And and the idea was to employ those who were less employable. It was, and they did quite a good job of it. And then eventually spun it off to a local businessman. And that was where I came in. He had not paid anything for it at all. And yet he had these big machines and they were producing. They weren't actually doing the pineapple thing. They were actually getting scraps of garments and they were making it into thread and selling the thread out. So I worked hard at trying to wrap this up for MCC so that the people that would follow me would not have to deal with it. But it's an example of sort of one of the many initiatives that MCC was involved with. I mean, there's a big dramatic difference between recycled wool versus virgin wool that comes right out of the cotton. So water consumption is 62% less, energy consumption 33% less, and greenhouse gas emissions by 18%. So that was a very interesting observation. Here's another Prokriti initiative. They're making fiber paper. So you can go into 10,000 villages today and buy cards that are made out of this product. Pobitra, the organization Mary mentioned, that they're working with former sex workers. And so they're trying to give them skills in sewing and a variety of new initiatives so that they can survive without their former form of employment. Basha is another interesting initiative that was started by an MCCer who had been instrumental in creating Pobitra. And then she came back after her term and she started this, Basha, where she's taken those women that come out of Pobitra and creating jobs for them and selling products around the world. So we spent some good time with her. One of the big challenges of any of these kind of industries is that women have children. And what do you do with children, right? What do you do with daycare? Especially when the family, there's no other spouses or, challenges in families. So they would provide daycare. So a couple of the times when I came in, all these children were sleeping. It was unbelievable. So cute, to see these little people. During my last few weeks in Bangladesh, one of our MCC workers had got involved in the remnant industry in Bangladesh. So you've got a huge clothing industry. What happens to all the scraps, right? So here there were acres and acres and acres of businesses that were set aside to sort out this clothing, these scraps, into the colors, clean them, and then bale them up into bales. So here again, the women were doing the bulk of the work. Here they're baled and ready for transport, and they would go out on rickshaws, like you see in the back there, sorted out into their different colors. So what color do we choose? This is one of our MCC workers. He was up there looking at the different colors. What color do we choose? And I say that by how do we make decisions about the clothing that we wear, the garments that we put on our bodies, given what we know about the rest of the world. If you don't know, then it's actually way easier. You could just go buy your clothing. You can be happy, When you know, then it becomes a lot different. And so how do our lives impact the choices of others? Any questions? Yes, sir.
Dave, occasionally you hear about North American brands of clothing or shoes and how they occasionally you hear in the news about North American brands that take pride in the fact that they make sure that their products are made in factories that have certain standards. Did you see any evidence of there being a difference in?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I didn't mention that here because of the issue of time, but there were, after the collapse of the Rana factory in 2013, two initiatives were started up, one based in Europe and one based in North America. So the Joe Freshes and the Walmarts and all of them, they came together and said, even in Canadian Tire and the Bay and so on, they said, we need to improve the standards, the safety standards, the working conditions of people in Bangladesh. So they set up, there was an accord and another agreement that were set up 5 years from 2013. They're both ended now in 2018. Significant changes have happened in these factories, structural changes, safety standards, and so on, but there's still a lot of work to do. So the concern now is that the Bangladeshi government is taking over this responsibility, and there's concern that, that this is not going to go through and these standards are not going to be kept. Partly because a lot of government officials are hand in glove within the garment industry. So, you can keep production costs down by not having to make these kind of improvements, in the conditions. And interestingly, you saw that picture of the discrepancy between what you buy the clothing for and what the garment worker makes. Well, the producers of these garments will go to in China and say, how much are you going to make this for? And they say $5. And they come to Bangladesh and say, we can get it $5 there. What are you guys going to produce? $4. So guess who loses, right? It's not the owners. Although they too are squeezed because of this. They may want to improve their conditions for their employees, but because of the financial constraints, it becomes more difficult to do that. We have one more, if there's no more questions. I got one more slideshow. And this is sort of a slideshow. I was asked by the Luther Seminary, a prophet of the Luther Seminary, to put together a slideshow with the music of Canticle of the Learning, of the Turning. And so I did that. And so it brings us into the season where we are now, Christmas. And it also illustrates sort of my perspective on the people of Bangladesh.
My soul cries out with a joyful shout that the God of my heart is great, and my spirit sings of the wondrous things that you bring to the ones who wait. You fixed your sight and your servant's plight, and my weakness you did not spurn. So from east to west shall my name be blessed, for the world be about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, that the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. Though I am small, my God, my all, you worked great things in me, and your mercy will last from the depths of the past to the end of the age to be. Your very name puts a proud to shame, and for those who would for you yearn, you will show your might, put the strong to flight, for the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn.
From the halls of power to the fortress tower, not a stone will be left on stone. Let the king beware, for your justice tears every tyrant from his throne. The hungry poor shall weep no more, for the food they can never earn. There are tables spread, every mouth be fed, for the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. Though the nations rage from age to age, we remember who holds us fast. God's mercy must deliver us from the conqueror's crushing grasp. This saving word that our forebears heard is the promise which holds us bound. Till the spear and rod can be crushed by God, who is turning the world around. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, let the fires of your
justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near and the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring. Let the fire and the justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near and the world is about to turn.
Thank you, Dave and Mary Lou. Are you guys going to hang around for a little bit here? Absolutely. Okay, so if you have any other questions, you can touch base with them. But again, always appreciate hearing from you guys. Just a wealth of knowledge and resources for us. And a timely message as we come into the Christmas season. Really, like, it's prime buying time, and it's gives some food for thought as to how we spend those dollars. So thank you again. Thanks, everyone, for coming. And there's lots of leftovers.